Come on by and have a bite at the Crossroad Diner, that place where your spirit goes when it might be time to change direction. You'll remember last time we were talking to my old boss and broadcaster Glen Ivey about how his career had developed and evolved, and we were just about to get to the place where we met. Glen is still working in Houston, but he gets a call from Longview, Texas.
I'm on the air at KTHT at night, and he said, I'm H.A. Tony Bridge, Jr., and I am the owner and manager of the Big K Radio Network. Whoa. And he said, I've got stations in Longview and Marshall. And he said, I really like the sound of your program. And he said, I'd like to talk to you about coming to be our operations director. And I said, well, first of all, I didn't know where Marshall, Texas was, to be honest with you. Longview, I'd vaguely heard of. He said, why don't you come on up as soon as you can? He said, just give me a call. Come up some weekend, maybe next weekend, or maybe this weekend. It's a beautiful drive. Come on up. We stayed in Longview,
right? Because
that was where my job was going to be based. But that morning when I called him to confirm that I was there, he said, I think we should meet in Marshall. Just come on over here to Marshall. It's only 20 miles. And I was staying at the Holiday Inn on Highway 80. So it's just down Highway 80. I went there, met with him. We talked, and he outlined, kind of what he wanted, which was somebody to take over running the 2 radio stations in Longview. And I thought, well, we're not talking about that network after all, are we? It's just 2 stations in. He said, well, the Big K, you'll do some work with me in Marshall, And I said, well, I need to look at that station. It's just like this one. And Steve, you know the story here, but our listeners and viewers should know that KMHT was a modern radio station, nice facility, and KLUE
glass, you could see through to the jocks in the air, and
KLUE was
the cinder block building.
It was poured concrete from R.G. Letourneau, the famous builder and philanthropist in Longview, and there were 2 like Quonset hut things attached with cinder blocks, and it was horrible. Acoustics were horrible. You could literally, as you have noted, hear from one end of the building to the other. When this receptionist answered the phone, the intercom was unneeded. So I pulled up, and there are people who literally had called me and said they wanted to talk to me about hiring them, and they pulled up in front of the radio station and decided not to get out of the car. Okay.
Right.
That's how bad it was. Well, my wife was sitting in the car. We were getting ready to go back to Houston. And I walked in. The facility was a dog. It was really, it was challenging, to say the least. So I got back in the car and driving back to Houston. I thought about it, and I talked it over with my wife, and I said, I think I like this place. It's a small town. I think it'd be a good place to raise the kids. My wife was now pregnant with a second child. So I'd pretty much made up my mind. And I got back to Houston, and I went into my boss, who was the program director, Terrell Matheny. And I said, Terrell, I've decided to leave KTHT. By then, I had called Tony and told him. And Tony said, I'll be sending you an official letter, which he did on Big K Stationery.
Big K Network Stationery.
It was a formal offer detailing my responsibilities and all this sort of, very formal kind of thing.
Oh, yeah.
Terrell Matheny just nearly jumped up behind he said, I don't mind you leaving us. I don't blame you for leaving us. But Longview, Texas? You sure? I said, absolutely. It's Longview. He said, that's not going to look good, You moved from Houston to Longview? On your own decision? You haven't been fired or anything? No? Okay. I worked out my 2 weeks, went to Longview. And it was challenging. My wife and I The record library was a disaster. They were missing so many things. We went through the library on the floor and went through the records. Have you ever heard of this one? No. And about 3 months after I went to Longview, another decision point arose. I got a call from J. Robert Wood, who was the program director of CHUM in Toronto, Ontario. Excuse me. Now, that's another very powerful top 40 station, basically covering Detroit. He wanted me to audition for him, send him an audition tape. He had heard about me, but hadn't heard me. Well, this was one of those decisions I really didn't have. It wasn't tough to say no, but I didn't say no.
Trying to keep that door open.
Yeah. And at this point in time, and we had a magazine called Billboard, still out there, I guess.
Sure.
And there were stories about how the Canadian government was pressuring Canadian radio stations to play more Canadian music. So, I was thinking in my mind, regulatory wise, this is going to be a problem. Well, I made him an audition, and it was the worst audition tape anybody has probably ever submitted.
Oh, I don't know. I think you helped me make one that probably wasn't quite as good.
So I sent it off to Canada, and he called me back. And he said, Mr. Ivey, you don't want this job, do you? And I said, no, sir, I do not. He said, you could have just told me that. He said, I know this is not you on this audition tape. I said, well, it is me. He said, no, that's not what I mean. It's not your best. It's not even your second best. He said, you just didn't want the job and you didn't want to tell me. And I said, that's right. And he said, I respect that. He said, we didn't waste too much time. He said, but man, he said, you still could have flown up here. He said, I would have flown you up here, wined you and dined you and all this stuff. And I said, I'm just not going to take advantage of somebody like that when I have no intention of taking the job. I was at Longview for 13 years.
Wow.
Station is sold. I stayed on with the new owners who were car dealers who knew nothing about the broadcast business. I was now sales manager. I was doing really well at that because, with a small town like that, you become known. Yeah. And being on the air made everybody know who I was. And I've been active in the community and so forth. So selling was pretty easy. One of the first things I did was sell the biggest contract the station had ever had with Dr. Pepper, an annual contract, which was rare in Longview. Very few contracts, period. One day, the receptionist buzzed me. She was also in charge of handling the paperwork. And she buzzed me on the intercom and she said, I have a question for you. Why on earth would you give up this huge contract and the commission that goes with it? And I said, what are you talking about? And she said, well, Bud says he's taking that contract. And Bud was the younger partner of the two brothers that owned the station. I said, there's no way I would have done that. She said, well, you mean he's just taking it over? I confronted Bud and he said it would look bad if I had a bigger contract than he did because he's, supposed to be the guy. So we went round and round. And finally I said, you know what, Bud, I just don't think this is going to work. And I think it's best for me to leave. And he said, oh, no. He said, and I said, because it's going to make him look bad. Yeah. I said, well, I'm sorry, but you did it when you put your name on that contract. It started the ball rolling downhill. Had no idea what I was going to do, Steve. I had been given an opportunity literally days after this happened to take over as general manager for another radio station in Longview, KEES, which was changing hands. It was going to be owned by the company that owned the Shreveport Times, and I had a relationship with them. And they wanted
still owned by Mr. Kimbrough at that point? Was he the one selling it?
Yes, he was selling it to the Shreveport Times organization.
Okay.
And I actually went out there to Keys, and they all heard that I was going to take the job. And I had agreed to be general manager under one condition, and that was that they got the approval from the FCC by a certain date, because if they didn't, that meant I was going to be out of work for like 30 days. Right. And I couldn't afford that. I mean, I didn't have another job. The Keys FCC deadline passed and they hadn't approved it, so we're dead in the water on keys as far as I'm concerned. And at that point, that night, literally that night, I got a call from Wayne Harrison, who had worked for me twice in Longview in the early days and the later days. And he had just gone to work for a company called Metro Traffic Control. And they were looking for somebody to run Houston. Would I be interested in that? And I said, Wayne, I'm sorry. I really do need something because I don't really have anything lined up.
Right.
But I don't want to go back to Houston. I just do not. I said, if it was Dallas, I might think about it. And he said, oh, well, we're set in Dallas. We don't need anybody in Dallas. He said, but he said, man, I you could get this job. He said, I've built you up really big, with the boss, the owner. So I write that off. Next night, I get a call. Hello, Glenn. This is David Saperstein. I'm the owner of Metro Traffic Control. And I heard you don't want to go to work for me. And I said, everything was always personal with David.
Right. Yeah.
David, no, sir, it's not that at all. I just don't want to go to Houston. So what do you want to do? And I said, well, I would consider Dallas. We could do that. I said, well, that changes everything. He said, yeah, we can do that. He said, how soon can you get up to Dallas? I'll come up in a day or two. He said, okay. He said, once you come up, we have a program director who you need to meet with him, maybe do an audition for him. But he said, based on what Wayne told me, the job is yours. This is just a formality. He said, sure. Because the program director has got to feel like he's making a decision.
At this point, we lost internet connection briefly, and we picked back up after Glenn has accepted the job in Dallas.
Correct. But I had to be polite. I mean, it would be rude to, this is actually going to be my boss for a very short time. So I said, okay, I appreciate that. Just let me know. And about 10 minutes later, apparently all those other candidates just fell away. He said, I've spoken with Mr. Saperstein, and we've agreed that you're the best person for this job. And I said, by the way, how did this opening suddenly occur? And he said, the guy that was there, the anchor, said he's decided to resign and write a book. I did my report like the guy that I was replacing. Jess was his name. David Saperstein comes in. I've been there a week, and I've been doing traffic reports. And he comes in, and he watches me do a traffic report. He says, can you talk any faster than that? And I said, no, sir. You don't know how hard it is for me to talk this slow. And he said, well, that's a good thing. He said, that's one of the reasons we got rid of the other guy. And I said, wait, I thought he was writing a book. He said, well, when we found out that you were interested in Dallas, he said, I already knew you were going to be better than this guy.
So be better.
So I hadn't been there a month. Okay. Not 30 days. And I got one of those decision point calls where I should have said, no. David Saperstein called me and he said, Glenn, do you know if Southwest Airlines still flies from Dallas to Houston every 30 minutes? And I said, yeah, I think they do. Good. I'd like for you to be on the next one. I said, you want me to fly to Houston? I thought, damn Houston. Houston just keeps coming back in my life. Mm-hmm. And he said, I've got problems down there. And he said, I'm really impressed with what you've done for me in Dallas. He said, I think you can clean up Houston. He said, we'll get your hotel. You'll have a car. And he said, you need to get in there and figure out who to keep and who to let go. Mm. And I said, well, what about, and I mentioned the program director's name. He said, let's not involve him in this. Okay. He said, this is between us. Okay. Off I go to Love Field, get on a plane, fly to Houston, get a car, go to the hotel. Excuse me. Get a call from David Saperstein. Okay, Glenn. He said, here's the deal. He said, we're losing stations badly in Houston. And he said, I want you to turn it around. And I said, well, I thought you wanted me to decide who to keep and who to let go. He said, yeah, but in the meantime, you're going to have to be the guy. So I go in, and he said, and his wife was the accountant. She'll FedEx the checks to you. Just tell them how many weeks or how many days or no notice, whatever. You decide. And he said, I trust you to make the right decision. So I go in the next morning and I observe, and he's right. It was a bad operation. Very, very poor. There were a handful of people that were good. There was a producer who wasn't necessarily good, but he knew everything. He knew how to throw all the switches and all that. I said, well, this is not going to be that difficult because this person looks to me like a freeloader. She's only doing like 3 reports an hour. My gosh, that's crazy. I was doing like 10 or 12 in Dallas. The cover story was that I'm new in Dallas and I needed to find out more about how Metro operated and so forth.
Right.
So that afternoon, I called Phyllis Saperstein in Baltimore, and I said, hi, Phyllis. And she, hello, Glenn. How can I help you? And I said, well, I'm here in Houston. Oh, I thought you were in Dallas. I said, David didn't talk to you about what? And I said, well, I'm here in Houston to try to figure out who to keep and who to let go. And I've got the list of people and how many weeks or days we give them in severance. Okay. Well, if David trusts you with this, I trust you with this. So give me the numbers. And I did. And sure enough, the next morning, FedEx arrives, 9:00. There's their checks. Folks, we need to have a little meeting, one by one. I call them in and let them go. So I'm going to do the afternoon shift. I'm going to be the lead anchor that afternoon. And oh, by the way, in the process of letting them go, I acquired 2 more cars.
Oh, yeah.
They were driving company cars. One was an International Harvester Scout, which was the vehicle I had in Dallas. So at this point, I have actually 4 cars, Metro cars, that I'm responsible for. I stayed 30 days in Houston. I did finally find somebody to take my place so I could go back to Dallas. 31 years later, I retired. But before we finish this, I have to tell you the other decision point, which was an extremely huge turning point in my life. When I got to Houston, I'm there in a city I did not like to be in. But we had this Apple II computer. We had one of them in Dallas as well. It had been cut up and put into what looked like a terminal. It had no disk. It was just for show.
Yeah.
You turn it on, it would beep, and you get a cursor. That's it. No programming. But I'd always been fascinated with the idea of computers. So I went down to a computer store in Houston and bought a book, Apple Computers, which were kind of the computer at that point. And I learned programming. And so I decided that I could write a program that would let me type in the traffic and send it not only around the room to the other anchors, instead of us yelling at each other.
Right.
Or little slips of paper, which I also was a whole other story. So I wrote this program thinking that I could transmit the data over a telephone line, just like teletype.
Sure.
Well, it's not as easy as it sounds. I went through a couple of weeks of angst thinking that this isn't going to work. The computer store said, no, it's not going to work. Can't work. Nope. And the secret was I fed a modem down a phone line, and the other end, the modem answers and tells an Epson dot matrix printer to wake up and start printing the traffic. And it all came down to a cable. All I needed was a different kind of cable, a very unusual and unique cable. And it worked. And Saperstein came in and said, wow, that's impressive. I didn't know you know computers. I didn't know them until I got here. So, well, Steve, over the next few months, I decided that I could take this computer thing further. I wanted to get us on television. And the only way that we could get on television was to have computer graphics, in my mind. So I created what became the first computer graphics television program, all on an Apple II. And people laugh about that today, but I will tell you that we had 200 stations with Apple II computers within a very short period of time, maybe 3 years. And we later went to Macs, and I integrated laser discs to improve the graphics over time. But that became my career. I
Yeah.
went off the air maybe 4 years into or 3 years into my Metro career because I was too busy doing the television. And Saperstein one time asked me, he said, why did you do this? And I said, you know what? I can tell you this now. That traffic reporting was the easiest thing I'd ever done in broadcasting. Easy.
Yeah.
And I had all this free time between shifts, and I was bored.
Right.
So I picked up the computer stuff.
When I was desperate to get into radio
Right.
and had no idea, and KEES was owned by Mr. Kimbrough. His son was my best friend through elementary school. I thought I might have an in through there. I wrote him a letter, nothing. And I interned at KFRO to learn how the equipment worked. And by the time I got a chance to interview with you, I didn't have a tape, but I did know how to do a few things with the board. And so, and I had never had a dream that I would be able to work at KLUE, KHER. And that emerged because somebody showed up, got the light guy's job, and he didn't work out for very long. And you brought me in, and I worked for a year or so, went over to KLTV and Tyler, then decided, nope, I need to be I need to be back working for the Big K network. And I always appreciated your humor and your creativity. Do you remember Emmett Ickschnob from Yulk, Switzerland?
Yes, I do.
Okay. Yulk, Switzerland is KLUE backwards. And we had a Christmas promo where we were getting reports from Emmett about various things. It was just so much fun, and it was completely untrue. And I, my entire Judeo-Christian ethic, got challenged during that period of time. Sum up for us your counsel to folks who are going into something they don't really understand or know, and how they can do that with some level of confidence, and what they should set as expectations.
Well, I think, first of all, whatever you decide to do, you should have a passion for it.
Yeah.
Okay. We all have started our careers with something other than what we probably wanted to do.
Right.
I was fortunate to get into it fairly early in my career, but I worked at White's Auto for 3 or 4 years before I got into radio. But you have to be passionate about it. I'm not going to call any names or point out any particular person, but I don't believe that economically it makes sense. Maybe it's been 3 years since I took this job. It's time for me to go to another job because that's the only way I can make more money.
Right.
If that's your motivation, okay, fine. But to me, that's not a passion for a particular career.
Right. Yeah.
If you want to be a theater, you've got to tough it out. You may not be as good as you thought you were. And if you're not, you're going to find out fairly soon. And then you have to make that decision point. Do I continue with this? Auditioning, working in a restaurant or whatever? Or do I start looking for a real job, so to speak?
Right.
But passion is the most important thing. And I think, Steve, I saw it in you, the passion you had to be in broadcasting.
Mm-hmm.
I saw it in several other people. And I will mention, I'm extremely proud of the fact that KLUE, out of all the East Texas radio stations, and East Texas is everything east of I-35, we have more Hall of Fame inductees, Texas Radio Hall of Fame inductees, than any other little station. 1,000-watt daytimer in Longview, Texas,
Right.
has 5 inductees. I was fortunate to be one of them. Tony Bridge was another.
Yeah.
3 of the guys that I hired got in there. At least one of them is still active in broadcasting, Scott
Right.
Sparks, Houston.
Scott.
And it's just, to me, that was the reward. you may have thought that going to work for Clue was an exciting thing. You coming to work for Clue was exciting to me. The opportunity that I didn't have in Houston, the opportunity I really didn't have in Lubbock so much, to take somebody off the street, so to speak,
Right.
and that had a desire to be in broadcasting. That passion is the key. You know, to me, it's not like you going down the street and you go, oh, wait, there's a shoe store. I'll try there. And, oh, there's a radio station. I'll try there. You know, one of the favorite stories about broadcasting, and I'll wrap this up quickly. Hugh Downs, who was I read his book when I was in junior high, because, like I said, I wanted to be in broadcasting all my life. He told a story about how he got into radio. His family had a farm, and this is somewhere in the Midwest. And Hugh is a kid, young guy, and he's supposed to take the milk to town, to the dairy. So he's got those big old metal milk containers. The dairy's not open. The only thing that's open is the radio station, which is kind of down the street. And it's cold. And so he's looking for some place to park his butt. And the radio station door is open. He walks in and sits down and just kind of looks around and hears the radio going on. Doesn't know anything about broadcasting, anything about radio. And a few minutes later, this guy walks in and says, all right, son, come on back. We're ready for you. Hugh Downs walks back there, and they put him in a little studio with a microphone and say, okay, we'll start recording. You just do your thing. What? Do what? Read this. They gave him some news copy, gave him a commercial. He did it, and they said, okay, you're hired.
He said, hang on a second, I got to go take the milk over to the dairy, and then I'll be right back.
The milk's going to spoil if I don't get it to the dairy. I'll be right back. But, for someone who's getting into this business, which today is nothing like it used to be, but podcasting, and there's a great theory that I think, Steve, you probably would agree to, and that is that the future broadcasters are the podcasters. Yeah. And the internet radio people. Radio has killed itself. You know, owning a
the internet radio didn't hurt. The internet helped a hell of a lot with that.
Yeah, it did. It helped push it, but the biggest thing was deregulation. Yeah. The idea that someone like Clear Channel could come into Longview, Texas, and buy 3 radio stations in Longview. Right. You know how well that worked out. Yeah. It's been a pleasure talking with you, Steve, and I look forward to seeing more folks in this Crossroads Diner.
Thank you. Thank you, Glen Ivey. On behalf of Glen and myself, the idea is find out what you want. And the only way to find out what you want is to follow what you think you want. And that starts with your passion. And you may find out a month, 2 months, 3 months, a year into it that was an interesting thing, but you went into that to go somewhere else, to learn about something else. And forgive yourself for not knowing what you want to do the minute you're born. It's an evolution. You work into the world and things start becoming apparent to you, and what you like becomes apparent to you. And the people that you work with, and this goes back to, being 18 years old in Longview, Texas, and having a guy who I thought was 30, 40 years older than me, who was 3 or 4 years older than me, take an interest and give me an opportunity. Then what you do with that opportunity will give you a lot of information about not only what you want, but who it is that you are. Glen Ivey, thanks for being on the Crossroads Diner.
Thank you. Thank you, Steve.
See ya. Come on by and have a bite at the Crossroad Diner, the place where your spirit goes when it's time to change direction. Meet us here every Monday and Thursday for a new episode. See you next time.